if anyone has any questions, feel free. Because here you're just checking in. This has been like one of the many living room or dining room or over lunch, over dinner kind of conversations. I think I've lost count of the number of 4 or 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. conversations we've had over the last 1 week with some incredible people. If you have any questions, I just definitely want to open this up. If you have any, bro, come on. Let's do this. It's all right.
I just want to, I liked what Papa Amos said about his son, where there was a calling for him to become into the medical field. I'm sorry, I may ask a direct question. There have been instances where pastors have quit their jobs to get into full-time ministry, and then they earn only from that ministry itself. So what do you say? Is it the calling was there from God for them to leave their job wherein they had to feed their families and so on, and directly just get into the ministry, and then they do not teach or learn or train the entire congregation to do the same, so that if they do that, they're going to learn all those things from the ministry. They go and plant a church elsewhere and take the congregation to the other place. So is that right, or what is it?
I didn't quite get.
Maybe rephrase it for us.
The pastor came full time,
2 or 3 questions.
and he was paid by the church, is it?
I think if I can just summarize, I think COVID raised a lot of questions in that space or in that area, right? So I think at the end of the day, a lot of, again, and I know we are all aware of this also in our respective regions as well. You have people who are in the marketplace, who quit from the marketplace and get into full-time, but then run into some trouble, and then that creates complications. And I think a lot of the messaging we're talking about with respect to the kingdom and so on, that tends to take a back seat, because then maybe insecurity creeps in and so on, and then you have a lot of manipulation that creeps in, and so on and so forth. So if I got the drift of your question correctly, any thoughts on that? Because I know that's a trap that many fall into. They get into full-time, maybe they heard God, maybe they didn't, I don't know. But I think this isn't, thank you for raising that. That's a very good question. And I think COVID has presented that question in a new way to all ministries all over the world. That are you just supposed to be in that space where you're just focused on full-time and not on the marketplace? And I keep having conversations with friends about this, and I had someone tell me, I'm not joking, I have pastors in the city who have told me, hey man, you should just, you're meant for full-time, bro. You should just go into full-time, get out of the marketplace and just do full-time. And I very respectfully, and I've had pastors and friends tell me that, and I've had to respectfully tell them, I am afraid I'm going to become as irrelevant as some of the pastors I've seen in the city. If I do that, I'm scared that I may become irrelevant, because as long as I'm in the marketplace, I have a pulse on how things are. I would like to believe that I am more relevant when I'm in there, but I'm afraid that as soon as I quit from there, there'll be that disconnect. There will be that disconnect, and I don't want that disconnect to take place. Second thing, which I was talking to some of these friends about, and even some of these pastors, is I know that I'm learning an incredible amount in the marketplace that I would not learn if I were to go into full-time. I'm learning an incredible amount, and for crying out loud, I have access to people out there in the marketplace who would never walk into a building like this. And so that's something I would never turn my back on at all. But I have another thought on all of this, and I think COVID presented some tough questions to ministries and ministers about how they relate with the marketplace and so on, but I would love to have your thoughts on that. I hope I grasped your question well.
I'll just throw a little bit, and I think in the old Pentecostal move is if we're going to serve God, then you have to be full-time. If you are not coming full-time, you are a lay person. And so it comes because of the clergy and the laity differences. But as truth is being revealed to us, and God is moving us into more maturity and more understanding and more revelation of the truth, we now realize that everyone have to be equipped for ministry. And like you said, Charles said, with same saints movement. And we serve them. They actually are wholesome in their sphere of activity. So, in the COVID, if I have 20 believers and I'm the pastor, and 10 of them lost their job, the tithes have become very small. And I was paid from that. So I'm suffering now, also, together with them. But then the question is, do I trust God or not for my providence? The children of Israelite were supernaturally provided. So there's constantly this conflict. But the way I was called into the ministry was, when I came into the ministry, I was already a policeman, earning good money, and just got married, so I'm quite stable. So I was from the old coming into the new Pentecostal, or the new movement. So the culture was like that. Coming into ministry means leave your job and come into full time. But for those who are independent pastors, you really have to have the good income believers. Don't muzzle with the ox since it's serving you. But for me, it was different. I look at it this way. My boss is the Assistant Commissioner of Police. So he pays me, or the government. Now I come out, I'm going to be governed by Jesus, 100%, sold out to him. Whether the church is going to give me or not, I'm coming to serve him. Because that's how, like he said, Father become an example. The apostle who was above me walked in faith. There was no salary for him. He wouldn't take. Even if he make sure everyone have enough. I became like the same. I said, I'm going to walk in faith. I told my wife, if you ask for milk for the baby, when I'm a policeman, I'll go to the ATM. But now I'm come full time, you ask milk for the baby, I'll go on my knees. I'll not go to the church because he called me. There's total different lifestyle that I was training or I got myself into. So like when I went to India, God began to speak to me and said, the Jesus of India and the Jesus of Singapore are the same. So what do you mean? Don't fix a financial pike to Singapore. If you want to serve in India and win them, you got to live like them and trust God. Because that's how, at that time, in the early 80s, poverty was there. Quite bad. So I had to trust God. But I was already trained. And if I collect a monthly pay of $1,000 in the police force, I work for it and I get that salary. But when I come full time, trusting God, my faith level has to be believing God for $1. Now that I serve him, my need is $1,000. But my faith, because this was salary, this is faith, this is natural or secular, or I can't say secular, it's you work and you get it. This one, you are serving God, you need to walk by faith. So I had to believe that way, $5. At least Peter, when he walked on the water, he sinned and He called for Jesus, he picked him up, but I was in the water with a straw outside for a long time, waiting for the milk to come. But God was training me to trust him. So my thought is always how God took care of Elijah through a raven, and he got hamburger and beef burger with the bread and meat. I think so. And the fresh manna. Up to now, people are still looking for the factory. They won't find that factory. God supplied. And that's the same God lives in me. And our God's nature is giver. Our hands cannot be like this. Our hands should be like this. It's not gambling. I give 10%, I get 100-fold. No. Your life is like your Father. He is a giver, you're a giver. And if you are a giver, you sure receive. Because he owns it all. And you have his nature. And it's a principle that we follow. So in these 40 over years of serving God, God has sustained me supernaturally. And I can go anywhere, any place. Especially we are called for missions. So all these 40 years, flying, planting here, planting there, this thing, going there. All the flights supernaturally given. I make sure the local church don't give me. Because they have other needs. Thank God we didn't have that much income, so I cannot depend on them. So I grew in supernatural laws. Because walking on the water, you're defying gravity. You will sink. Unless you walk on supernatural laws, 100%, you'll be sinking. So Peter was confused. He saw the waves were always there. But fear came. That's why Jesus not only saved him, praise God, he didn't push him to where. He said, why do you doubt and still pull him out? Because he's learning the principle of faith. Like Jesus spoke to the tree. And it wasn't because he was angry or hungry. A hungry man is an angry man. No, he was teaching them faith. Have the God kind of faith. So I was taught, and the example was my spiritual father. Man of faith. Real father. I was impacted by that. And of course I need to take a step of faith. But this is one way. But it's the church responsibility also to supply to the servants who have dedicated themselves to serve on a full-time basis in the church. But then the concept that we have now is everybody are ministers. The new Christian has to be trained to a level that he become a minister, but he is sent to the police department where he works there and shines there with the life of Christ in him, impacting the light shining, but he's also paid for his job. But those who have come in on a full-time basis, we don't muzzle the hogs. We make sure we give them so that they can care. That's a little bit.
I thank you for that response. I know that we had some conversations about this before, and I've been talking to, I think COVID also really hammered some questions to ministries who were in a place where I know for a fact that there were ministries across the world, US, who had to lay off staff, lay off people. And those people had to go and start working as delivery people or in Amazon or so on.
Just an injection.
Yes.
I have no problem in working in the secular world. No problem, because his kingdom. I may collect pay, praise God, for my work, but I'm going to shine for Jesus.
Sure. And we had a conversation about this where we discussed about this hour that has come, which has been accelerated by COVID, where we are in a place where you can no longer afford to be one-dimensional. you have to be two-dimensional to be able to be in a place where you're almost immune to any kind of storm, whatever that storm may be, whether it's an economic storm, whether it's an earthquake, whether it's a Ukraine kind of war situation, whether that's whatever it is, that you're operating in a place where you're not dependent or reliant on, or you're not developing, or you're not unconsciously developing an unhealthy reliance on one way of supply.
Yes.
I think that's what I was trying to get at, and we spoke about that briefly last time, I remember, when you were here.
Okay, let me just throw in a few part experience, because I've lived all of them.
Yeah.
I've lived the full time. I'm using the terms because that's what
Sure.
everybody uses, whereby totally dependent on the income of the church and the giving. I've lived the work environment and functional completely. And I kind of now live in this middle place that both dimensions are functional.
Yes.
And I'd like to explain something, and everything has a context. And the context has to do because I say there's two kinds of people. There are those who are sent and those who went. And that's a problem.
Yes.
If you went, it's going to cost you. If you are sent, even if you're in the depth of it, there's a reason for the depth. It's part of the sending. Sometimes the lesson isn't economy, the lesson is trust. And we can miss that because we are measuring everything by economy. See, there's a thing. So I'll give an analogy for me. I lived in that duality where those who heard me preach said you should go full time. And so I listened. And I went full time. In full time, people had major breakthroughs in what I teach, but my family had crisis economically. Then flipped and did the work. And the family was comfortable, but I felt disconnected. So there's this like two-sided tug of war. I wasn't clear. Now that's the power of the fivefold. It took a prophet to speak into my life and say, stop having a dichotomy. God says function seamlessly like Melchizedek, king, priest. It will not diminish you to function in both realms, and there'll be seasons when you lean towards one more than the other. And none of the seasons are not God. The issue will not be the economy, but the impact. So this is the thing. So this is what I say. We have to remove formulas from our mind that say, I must live by the giving of the people or by work. The question is, what is God sending you into now?
Right.
That may determine that you work. That may determine that the people provide. You will know it is God because it will not be you pushing. Even with Elijah having his buggers, the brook dried.
Yep.
If he stayed at the brook, he would have died.
Yes.
Even though God had sent him. He had to move to a widow. God keeps doing those shifts with us, even though we are called. And so I think one of the things, and I do this in Liberia, there's a whole group of pastors we deal with that we had to bring into work. And they're pastors. And I had to seek, like I always told you, I had to seek scripture that would reinforce this reality, and I found the most profound one. See, in church circles for years, we've taught that Paul had a side hustle, making tents. And our idea was he did this to survive. See, that already sends a wrong message to how Paul functioned. If you study the book of Acts, it opens very strangely. It says, and Caesar chased people out of Rome. So Aquila and Priscilla, being Jews, he was chasing Jews, came to Ephesus. And because they were of the same trade with Paul, note the emphasis. They were of the same trade. So Paul was recognized as a tent maker. It wasn't something he did on the side. It was something he was engaged in full time. If anything, in the book of Acts, he spoke on the weekend. What was he doing the rest of the week? Now, if you study history, you'll discover something profound. And it's only connected to the closing parts of Acts. Chapter 18, when he says, when I was among you, I troubled no man for gold, silver, or clothing, but I took care of all those who were with me. Now, what does that mean? If you study history, you'll discover that Ephesus was the center of economy, much like Dubai is today. All the trade routes and everything converged at Ephesus. And the only client Paul had was the Roman army, because they lived in tents. So Paul was a government tender supplier for housing of the largest army on earth. So Paul's economy did not affect his apostleship. And I could go on to prove to you that Paul functioned in this full time. How do I know that? The Bible talks about how Felix asked him for a bribe. How does a governor of Rome ask a poor apostle for a bribe? That shows you his economy was off the charts. In the book of Titus, it says that, and Paul writes to Titus and says of Onesimus, whatever he owes you, I will pay. Please receive him as a brother. I've been with him for 2 years, the Bible tells us. Now, under Roman law, if a slave ran away, he would have to pay a day's wage for every day he was away. So Onesimus owed 2 years of wages, and Paul paid it off. So we have to completely reconfigure our thinking of who an apostle was and how he functioned in his operations, and it did not take away from him being the writer of half the New Testament. We are told about the church in Aquila and Priscilla's house. These are businessmen, but they are the guys who really brought up the church we know. So there are unique situations. Like Papa's situation is unique. If you've built an environment where the people you are equipping are massive enough to be your economy, then you need not move into what we may call a secular context, because God has made that possible. But if honestly the congregation you oversee can't take care of you, let me put it bluntly, get a job.
Amen.
It's just the way it is, man. Because what's going to happen, you're going to be dangerous.
Yeah.
You're going to begin to manipulate.
Yes.
You're going to begin to threaten. You'll move away from impartation. And instead of feeding the sheep, you'll begin feeding on the sheep. That's where you're going to go.
Lamb steak.
Milking the cows. tithes and
Absolutely.
offering.
Because that's the thing. See, let me say something about impartation and the principle of honor. Impartation, and I've had to teach a whole series on this, the process of impartation. Impartation works in this way. Paul says, if we give spiritual things to you, I like the term he used in the Greeks. It's material. It's spiritual, tangible stuff. It's not teachings. It's not information. It's impartation, meaning when Papa speaks into your life, he deposits something. That thing is so powerful, it produces. What it produces is what Paul says, is it then wrong that we benefit from that produce? So it came from the grace, it changed life, the life produced. Even in the Old Testament, when somebody brought the tithe, he said, a stranger I was, until the Lord brought me into a good place. And this is the evidence of it. So the kingdom is so powerful that's why God will say to Papa, the God of Singapore is the same God of India. Why? Because he is carrying the kingdom with him. And when he speaks into that space, he breathes life. And in the season when he's breathing life, he needs supernatural sustenance. But a season comes when that life has produced. He no longer needs to live by faith, because the faith has produced. Now, there can be a return. But now we have an inverse ministry. We want the return to produce the faith. It can't work that way. That's called casino. It doesn't work because there's no way you can activate grace with money. Grace can activate money. Money cannot activate grace. Grace is superior to money.
Amen.
That's the principle.
That was so good. So good. Goodness.